Tonight, look up into the dark between the stars and listen to how quiet it is. Above you turn 100 billion suns, and far beyond them, nearly 2 trillion other galaxies, each one its own vast ocean of stars, scattered through a space so wide the mind goes soft just trying to hold it. By every reasonable guess we have ever made, a universe that large should be crowded with life. It should be murmuring with 1,000 distant voices, and yet, for all the years we have listened, we have heard nothing at all, no signal, no whisper, no reply, only the long, smooth silence of a sky that seems, somehow, to have nothing to say. Tonight, we listen to that silence together. There is nothing you have to do tonight, nowhere you have to be. The listening is mine to do, yours is only to rest. So breathe out, slowly, and let your shoulders fall away from your ears. Let the weight of the whole long day go soft, and set it down. We are going to drift out tonight, far past the warm circle of the earth, into the great quiet between the stars, and there is no need to stay awake for any of it. If you fall asleep before the end, that is exactly as it should be. Let the words carry you, and let go whenever you like. If you are new here, this is Sleep Among Galaxies. And what we do is simple. We take the vast, strange, beautiful story of the universe, and we tell it slowly, gently, in the dark, so that it can quiet the noise in your mind and walk you down, step by step, into sleep. No bright lights, no sudden sounds, just a calm voice, and the wonders of the cosmos, and all the time in the world. If that is something you would like more of, take a slow breath, and subscribe before you drift off. It costs you nothing, and it is the quiet thing that lets us keep making these, night after night, for you. And before we begin, I would love to know who is out there in the dark with me tonight, so if you are still awake, tell me in the comments. What city are you listening from? And what time is it there, where you are? I read them. Every one. There is a strange and gentle comfort in it, in knowing that all across the world, in 100 different time zones, in 100 different darknesses, there are people lying just as you are lying now, letting the same quiet voice carry them toward the same quiet sleep. You are not awake alone tonight. You never are. Now, settle in. Find the most comfortable stillness you can. Let your body grow heavy against the bed. Let your breathing slow and deepen and find its own slow rhythm, the way the tide finds the shore. There is nothing ahead of us now but the long, soft unwinding of the night and a single quiet question turning slowly in the dark. Sleep among galaxies. So here is the question, the one that has been turning quietly in the dark for far longer than you might think. If the universe is so vast, and it is vast almost beyond the reach of language, then where is everybody? Begin with the numbers, gently, because the numbers are where the expectation comes from. Our own galaxy, the Milky Way, is a single slow wheel of stars about 100,000 light-years across. No one knows exactly how many stars are gathered inside it, but the careful estimates run from 100 billion at the low end to perhaps 400 billion at the high. Let that figure simply rest in your mind for a moment. Not as something to grasp, but only to hold. 100 billion suns, 400 billion perhaps, all turning together in one great spiral, of which our own sun is a single quiet ember somewhere out along one of the arms. And the Milky Way is only one galaxy. When we turn our telescopes toward the darkest, emptiest-looking patches of the night sky, places that seem to hold nothing at all, and we let them gather light, patiently, for days at a time, what comes back to us is not emptiness. It is galaxies, hundreds of them, thousands, each one a separate island of 100 billion stars or more, and each one so far away that its light has been crossing space for the whole age of the Earth, and longer. The best counts we have now suggest that the observable universe holds somewhere near 2 trillion galaxies. 2 trillion. And if you try to gather all of their stars together into a single number, you arrive at something close to 200 billion trillion. A 2 followed by 23 zeros. There are, by the best reckoning we can make, more stars in the sky above you tonight than there are grains of sand on every beach and in every desert on the whole of the earth. That is the first thing to hold, the sheer quiet immensity of the stage. And for most of the long human story, that was all we knew, the stars themselves. We could not see whether any of them held worlds of their own. We could only wonder. A planet, after all, is a small dark thing, lost in the glare of the star it circles, far too faint and far too close to its sun for us to make out across such enormous distances. For thousands of years, every world we knew of was one of the small handfuls circling our own sun. Whether other stars carried planets too, or whether ours was somehow alone in keeping them, no one could say. We can say now. And the answer, when it finally came, was richer than almost anyone had dared to expect. Over the last few decades, with patient instruments built to watch for the faint, regular dimming of a star as a planet crosses in front of it, we have begun, at last, to find those other worlds. One at first. Then a few. Then a quiet flood of them. As of the night I am speaking to you, the number of planets we have confirmed beyond our own sun has passed 6,000, more than 6,000 new worlds, each one found, and checked, and carefully counted, in a small patch of sky, where only a single lifetime ago we knew of exactly none. And those are merely the ones we have so far managed to catch, with eyes still far too weak to see most of what is surely there. Because here is what those thousands of worlds have quietly taught us: they are not rare, they are everywhere. When the counting is done, and the gaps are filled in, the conclusion is almost difficult to believe. There are, in our galaxy, more planets than there are stars. Most suns, it seems, are not alone. Most of them carry worlds, often several, sometimes many, turning in the dark around them, exactly as the Earth turns around ours. 100 billion stars, or more. And more planets still than there are stars to hold them. So the great stage is not bare after all. It is crowded with worlds, uncountable worlds. But a world is not yet a home. A ball of molten rock pressed too close to its star, or a frozen stone drifting far out in the cold and the dark, is a world, and yet nothing we know of could ever live there. So the question narrows, gently, not how many worlds are there, but how many worlds are like this one? How many turn at just the right distance from their star, in that narrow temperate band where it is neither too hot nor too cold, where water could lie on the surface as water rather than as steam or as ice? We have a name for that band, a soft, almost domestic name for so cosmic a thing. We call it the habitable zone. The place where a world could, at the very least, be gentle. And even that question, once entirely unanswerable, now has an answer beginning to take shape. From the thousands of worlds we have found, we can begin to reckon how common the right kind really is. The careful estimate is that something near a fifth of all the stars like our Sun, perhaps a little more than 1 in 5 of them, carries a world roughly the size of the Earth, turning in that same temperate zone where water could rest and gather. 1 in 5. Out of 100 billion stars. Set those two numbers beside each other, quietly, in the dark, and let them do their slow arithmetic. When that is worked carefully through, the figure that emerges is this. In our galaxy alone, there may be somewhere around 300 million worlds that are, in their size and their warmth and their gentleness, something like our own. 300 million places where the rain could fall, and the seas could gather, and the long, slow story that unfolded here might, in principle, have unfolded too, and the nearest of them may not be far away at all, not by the great measure of the stars. The closest such world could be a mere dozen light-years from where you are lying now. close enough that its star is one you might, on a clear and moonless night, very nearly see with your own eyes. 300 million gentle worlds in a single galaxy, and very nearly 2 trillion galaxies in the sky. This is where the expectation comes from. Not from hope, and not from dreaming, but simply from the numbers, laid out plainly, and then followed honestly to where they lead. And there was once a man who tried to follow them all the way to the end. His name was Frank Drake, and on a quiet day in the year 1961, at a small gathering of astronomers in a place called Green Bank, among the green and folded hills of West Virginia, he sat down and tried to do something that sounds almost impossible. He tried to estimate, honestly and carefully, how many voices there might be out there, scattered across the galaxy. Not worlds, not life of the simplest kind, but civilizations. Minds, something like our own, that had risen far enough to look up, and to build, and to send some signal of themselves out into the dark. He did not pretend to already know the answer. Instead, he did something quieter and wiser. He took the one great impossible question, and broke it gently into a chain of smaller ones, each of which could, one day, actually be measured. How many stars are born in the galaxy? How many of them hold planets? How many of those planets could bear life? How often life, given the chance, truly begins? How often it grows complex, and then clever, and then able to speak across the distances between the stars? And then, last of all, the hardest and the most haunting link in the whole chain. How long such a civilization tends to last, once it has arisen, before it falls quiet again. This chain of questions is known today as the Drake equation, though it was never truly an equation in the way that a simple sum is. It was a way of thinking, a way of taking a question far too large for any single mind to hold, and laying it out, link by patient link, so that each piece of it could be looked at on its own, in the calm and level light of reason. And the strange and rather wonderful thing is that, in all the years since Frank Drake first set it down, we have slowly begun to fill in the earliest links with real and solid numbers. The count of the stars, the frequency of planets, the breadth of the habitable zone. The pieces he could once only guess at have become, one by one, things that we now actually know. And every one of those answers, as it has quietly come in, has pointed in the very same direction. More stars than we had thought, more planets than there are stars, more gentle, temperate, water-warmed worlds than anyone had once dared to hope for. With every link we have managed to measure, the case for a crowded and living galaxy has grown stronger, and not weaker. The front of the chain keeps filling itself in with numbers that all seem to say the same patient thing. Yes, the conditions are everywhere. Yes, the stage is vast and old and well prepared. And yes, by every reasonable expectation we can form, the galaxy should be softly humming with life. And at least some small part of that life should by now have grown old enough and clever enough to be heard. So lie here a little while with that expectation before we go any further into the night. It is a warm thought, in its own quiet way. A sky holding 2 trillion galaxies. A home galaxy of 100 billion suns and more. 300 million temperate worlds, turning gently in our own small corner of it. The nearest of them perhaps close enough to very nearly see. And a long, patient chain of reasoning that says all of this ought to add up, in the end, to company, to neighbors, to voices in the dark. Everything we know says the universe should be full. Hold that thought gently as the night deepens around you, because in a little while, very softly, we are going to set it down beside the one quiet fact that has troubled every mind that ever truly stopped to look. We are going to set it down at last beside the silence. And now, gently, the silence. It begins, as so many of these things do, not in an observatory but in an ordinary moment. The year is 1950. At a laboratory in Los Alamos, in the high desert of New Mexico, a group of physicists are walking to lunch, talking idly, the way people do, about a cartoon they had seen, and about the idea of flying saucers. Among them is a man named Enrico Fermi, one of the great minds of his age, a man who could hold whole oceans of physics in his head and do their arithmetic in the space of a walk down a corridor. The talk drifts, the way lunchtime talk does, and the subject changes, and the others have nearly forgotten the sources entirely. And then, out of a quiet that has settled over the table, Fermi suddenly asks a question that seems to come from nowhere. Where is everybody? His companions, Edward Teller among them, and Emil Konopinski, and Herbert York, understand at once what he means, even with so little said. He has been doing the arithmetic in his head while the others ate. The galaxy is old, far older than the Earth. It is full of stars, and very likely full of worlds. If even a few of those worlds gave rise to clever life, and if even a few of those gave rise to travelers, then in all the long ages that the galaxy has been turning, they should have had time, many times over, to cross it from end to end. To have come, by now, even here. And yet the sky is empty. The Earth has never, so far as anyone can honestly show, been visited. No ship has landed. No clear signal has ever arrived. So where, in all that vastness and all that time, is everybody? It was an offhand question, asked over lunch and half in jest. But it would not let go. In time, it would come to be called the Fermi Paradox, though Fermi himself never gave it that name and never wrote it down as a formal problem. It was simply a question set loose in the world that turned out to be far heavier than it first appeared. Because the more carefully anyone looked at it, the less it seemed like a joke, and the more it seemed like one of the deepest and quietest puzzles we have. The numbers all say the universe should be full, and everything we can actually see and hear says it is silent. For a long time the silence could be explained away easily enough. Of course we had heard nothing. We had not truly been listening. We had no way to listen. But that too would change. In the year 1959, two physicists, Giuseppe Cocconi and Philip Morrison, published a short and careful paper pointing out something that had not quite been said aloud before. If another civilization out there wished to be heard across the gulf between the stars, there was a natural way for them to call, not with light, which the glare of stars would drown, but with radio. Radio waves slip through the dust and the dark of the galaxy almost unhindered, traveling for thousands of years across the empty spaces. And there is one particular note, one frequency, that any radio astronomer anywhere in the universe would surely know. The soft hum given off by hydrogen, the most common substance in all of creation, ringing out at a wavelength near 21 centimeters, at a frequency close to 1420 megahertz. It would be, they suggested, the obvious place to listen, a kind of natural meeting point on the dial, marked out by the chemistry of the cosmos itself. And someone was already preparing to listen there. The very next year, in 1960, a young astronomer named Frank Drake, the same Frank Drake who would soon write down his famous chain of questions, pointed a radio telescope at the green hills of Green Bank toward two nearby sun-like stars. Their names were Tau Ceti and Epsilon Eridani, quiet, ordinary stars, near enough to be worth a careful look. He listened at that same hydrogen frequency, hoping, perhaps half believing, that some pattern might rise out of the noise, some signal too regular, too deliberate, to be the work of nature. He called the effort Project Ozma, after the queen of a faraway imaginary land. For weeks he listened. And he heard nothing. Nothing but the soft, formless hiss of the universe going about its business. That was the beginning. In the years and the decades that followed, the listening only grew. Larger telescopes, more sensitive receivers, more stars, more frequencies, more patient hours spent sifting the static for any whisper of order. More than 60 years now of listening. 60 years of pointing our finest instruments out into the dark, and asking, as Fermi asked, where is everybody? And in all that time, in all that searching, we have never once found a confirmed signal. Not one voice, not one certain word from anywhere beyond the Earth. There was, once, a single haunting moment that came close. On a summer night in 1977, a radio telescope in the state of Ohio, a great flat instrument nicknamed the Big Ear, was sweeping the sky as it always did, recording whatever came in as columns of numbers on long sheets of paper. A few days later, a volunteer astronomer named Jerry Amon was working through the printout by hand when his eye fell on something in the margin. For 72 seconds, the telescope had caught a narrow, powerful signal near that very same hydrogen frequency, rising far above the background and then fading away as the sky turned. It was exactly the kind of signal that had been hoped for: strong, narrow, close to the natural meeting point on the dial. So startled was Amon that he circled the numbers in red pen and wrote a single word beside them: "Wow." And so it has been called ever since, the wow signal. But here is the quiet ache of it. The telescope listened again, on the following nights, at the same patch of sky. And the signal was gone. It never came back. In all the years since, with every instrument we have looked again and again at that one place in the sky, and we have never heard it a second time. One signal, 72 seconds long, never repeated, never explained, and never confirmed to be anything at all. A single knock on the door, in the middle of the night, and then nothing, ever again. It remains to this day the most tantalizing and the most lonely thing we have ever found. In our own time, the listening has grown grander still. Some years ago, an effort was begun called Breakthrough Listen, the most sweeping and sensitive search for other voices ever attempted, paid for with $100 million from a man named Yuri Milner, and able to scan vast stretches of sky and millions of stars with a patience no earlier search could match. If anyone nearby were broadcasting, the hope was this would be the effort that finally caught them. And there have been moments, even here, when the heart leapt. Not long ago, the search picked up a curious narrow signal that seemed to come from the direction of Proxima Centauri, the very nearest star to our own sun. For a while it was studied quietly and carefully, this faint thing from the closest possible neighbor. But in the end, after long examination, it proved to be no one out there at all. It was us. Some stray whisper of our own technology, some piece of human radio interference, masquerading for a moment as a voice from the stars. The signal was set aside. The silence closed over again. And only very recently, within the last year, in the cold December dark of 2025, a visitor passed through our solar system from somewhere far beyond it, a wanderer from another star, swinging closest to the sun a few days before the year's end. As it passed, the great listening machines turned toward it, just in case this traveler from the deep should carry some trace of a maker, some hum of a distant mind. A handful of candidate signals were found and examined, one by one. And one by one, every one of them turned out to be the noise of our own world, our own transmitters, our own machines, leaking into the data. From the visitor itself, there came nothing, no word, no sign, only stone and ice, and the long, indifferent silence of the dark it had come from. So this is where we stand. More than 60 years of listening, with the finest ears we have ever built, across millions of stars and countless frequencies. And the answer, so far, is always the same gentle, immense nothing. Not a hostile silence. Not even quite an empty one. Just a silence, vast and patient and complete. The universe that the numbers promised would be full has, every time we lean in to listen, simply said nothing at all. And so the question only deepens and softens and settles over the whole of the night. If everything we know says they should be there, then why, in all this listening, can we not hear them? There is a first answer to that question, and it is the gentlest of them all. Perhaps they are there, just as the numbers promise. Perhaps the galaxy is full of voices, exactly as we hoped. And perhaps the only reason we have not heard them is the simplest reason there could be, that the distances are too great and the time too short for any voice and any listener to ever quite meet. Begin with the distances because they are almost impossible to feel. We have already said that our galaxy is a wheel of stars, some 100,000 light-years across. Let that single phrase open slowly in the mind. A light-year is the distance that light travels in 1 year. And light is the fastest thing there is, the very speed limit of the universe, the edge beyond which nothing at all can go. In a single second, a beam of light could circle the whole of the Earth 7 times over. It crosses from the Sun to us, across 93 million miles, in about 8 minutes. And yet even that unimaginable swiftness takes a full year to cross a single light year, and 100,000 long years to cross our galaxy from one rim to the other. Nothing can ever go faster. That is not a flaw in our engines, to be cured one day by something cleverer. It is a law woven into the deepest fabric of things, as fixed as the dark itself. The stars are simply, truly that far apart. So imagine, gently, that somewhere out there, another civilization once did exactly what we are doing now. Imagine they looked up, and wondered, and built their own great instruments, and sent some signal of themselves out into the dark. A patient call, spreading outward in every direction at the speed of light. If that world lies 1,000 light-years away, and 1,000 light-years is still near, by the measure of the galaxy, then their call has been 1,000 years upon the road before it ever brushes the Earth. The signal washing faintly over your roof tonight, if it came at all, would have left its home before the first stone of any cathedral was laid, before any language you have ever heard was spoken. And our own first whispers of radio, slipping out into space for barely 100 years now, have so far reached only the nearest small handful of stars, a little bright bubble around the Sun, lost in the vastness, its outermost edge still only 100 light-years from where we stand. We have been speaking for the merest instant of cosmic time, and our voice has barely cleared the doorstep, but distance is only the half of it. The deeper part, the part that aches a little in the quiet, is time. Think back to that last and hardest link in Frank Drake's chain of questions, the one he placed at the very end of all the rest. Not how many worlds bear life, nor how many grow clever, but this: how long does a civilization last? How long, once a world has learned to speak across the stars, does it go on speaking before it falls silent again, whether by its own hand, or by the slow turning of fortune, or simply by changing, over the ages, into something that no longer cares to call? We do not know our own answer to that question yet. We have been a broadcasting world for only a single human lifetime. We cannot say whether we will go on for 1,000 years, or 1,000,000, or whether our own small voice will fade far sooner than either. And whatever that span turns out to be, a few centuries, a few thousand years, it is a single candle flame held up against the vast dark age of the galaxy. The galaxy has been turning for more than 13 billion years. Stars beyond counting have been born and have died within it, over and over, 10,000 generations of them, long before our own sun was ever kindled. And into all that boundless ocean of time, picture now the brief, bright lives of the speaking worlds, each one flaring up for a little while, sending out its call into the night, and then growing quiet again. One here, 10,000 years ago, one there, 1,000,000 years before that, one far across the galaxy, that will not even be born for an age still to come. Here is the heart of it. For two worlds to ever truly meet, to send and to hear, to call and to answer, their two brief flames must not merely be near enough in space. They must overlap in time. The one must still be speaking at the very moment its signal, after its 1,000-year journey across the dark, at last arrives at the other. And if each voice lasts only a little while, and the gulf between the stars is so wide that any message spends whole ages merely crossing it, then the odds of two flames ever overlapping grow heartbreakingly small. A signal may be racing toward us at this very moment, faithful and clear and full of meaning, and yet sent by a world that fell silent 100,000 years before it will arrive. Or our own call may be sweeping outward, even now, toward a world that will not learn to listen for another million years, and will hear us, if it ever hears us at all, long after we ourselves are gone, and our sun has changed, and no one is left on earth to know that we were ever answered. It is like standing in a vast, dark, and silent house, a house with 1,000,000 rooms, stretching away farther than any eye could ever follow, and in each room, every so often, for just a single moment, someone lights a match and calls out softly into the dark, and then the match goes out. The house may be full of people, it may be crowded with life, room upon room of it, all down the endless halls. And yet, because each light burns so briefly, and the rooms are so many and so far apart, you might stand there for the whole of your life, listening with all your heart, and never once see another flame at the very instant you are looking, never once catch a voice while you are still calling, not because the house is empty, but only because it is so unspeakably large, and the lights so brief, and the timing so cruelly, quietly hard to keep. There is, in this answer, a strange and gentle comfort. For it asks us to believe nothing dark about the universe at all. It does not require that life be rare, or that minds destroy themselves, or that something terrible lies waiting in the deep. It asks only that we accept the plain and honest size of things, the true width of the distances, and the true depth of the time, and to see that, against so vast a stage, even a galaxy brimming over with voices might still, from any one small world, sound perfectly, achingly silent. The party may be in full and joyful swing, in 100 rooms at once. We may simply have arrived in a quiet corner of the house, at a quiet hour, and missed, by ages and by light years, the music in the very next hall. Perhaps that is all the silence is. Not absence, but distance. Not loneliness, but only the long, slow patience that such a universe must demand of anyone who would try to speak across it. And perhaps, somewhere out there tonight on a world we will never see and never name, another quiet voice is wondering the very same wondering, and listening to the very same silence, and taking from it, as you may take from it now, the very same gentle comfort, that the stillness all around may not be emptiness at all, but only the vast, dark, patient distance between one brief and lovely light and the next. And there is a quiet dignity in that thought, if you let it settle all the way down. It asks us to be patient with the universe, the way we might ask the universe to be patient with us. It says that the silence is not a verdict, and not a judgment, and not a door closed against us, only a kind of waiting, built into the very size and shape of things, that no one anywhere could ever hurry, or shorten, or undo. To listen across such distances and such depths of time is itself an act of patience, almost beyond imagining. And perhaps that patience is the first thing any world must learn, before it can ever hope to hear another. It is a kind answer, it may even be the true one. But it is not the only answer the silence allows, and so, softly, and in no hurry at all, we go on. But what if the distances are not the whole answer? What if the silence is telling us something harder and stranger, not merely that the voices are far away, but that there were never so very many voices to begin with? This is the next quiet door we step through, and to step through it we have to look again, more closely, at one of the warm assumptions we made at the start of the night. We said that there may be 300 million gentle worlds in our galaxy, worlds of the right size, at the right distance where water could rest upon the surface. And that is very likely true. But we let a soft and hopeful thought slip in beside it, almost without noticing it pass. The thought that where a world could be a home, life would surely, given time enough, fill it. That a temperate world and a living world are one and the same thing. Perhaps they are not. Perhaps the road from a bare, warm world to a world full of minds is far longer, and far narrower, and far more strewn with straight and difficult passages. than the simple count of habitable planets could ever suggest. This is the heart of an idea that has come to be called the rare Earth hypothesis, set out near the turn of the century, in the year 2000, by a geologist named Peter Ward and an astronomer named Donald Brownlee. They did not doubt that simple life might be common across the universe. Life of the smallest kind, they granted, might begin readily and cling on stubbornly almost anywhere it could find the barest foothold. But complex life, large, intricate, many-celled life, the kind that can build and think and at last look up and wonder, that, they suspected, might be vanishingly rare. And it might be rare because the Earth, looked at honestly and without flattery, is not quite the ordinary world we like to imagine it. It may be a very unusual one, held in a long and improbable balance of conditions, almost any of which, had it only fallen out otherwise, would have left the world lifeless, or simple, or still, and silent forever. Consider a few of those conditions, gently, the way you might turn smooth, cool stones over in your hand in the dark. Consider the ground itself. The Earth's hard outer shell is not a single fixed and frozen crust, but a set of great slow plates, drifting and grinding upon the soft hot rock beneath them, rising up into mountains over the long ages and sinking back again, slowly, into the deep. This slow churning, this endless quiet restlessness of the very ground beneath your feet, turns out to be no small thing at all. It steadies the world's climate across the eons, drawing the air's warming gases down into the stone, and breathing them out again, over millions of years, keeping the long temperature of the planet within the narrow band that living things can bear. A world without that slow machinery might drift over time into killing heat, or sink slowly into endless ice, and stay there. The very ground, which only this morning we might have called the quiet, changeless furniture of the world, may be among the rarest and most precious things about it. Consider the moon. It hangs in our familiar sky so quietly that we have quite forgotten how strange it truly is. A moon improbably large for so small a world, very nearly a companion planet in its own right. And that great nearby weight does something quiet and vital and almost wholly unnoticed. It holds the Earth steady upon its axis, the way a gentle hand rests upon a spinning top to calm its wobble, so that the world tilts only a little as it turns, and the seasons keep their long, reliable, patient rhythm, year upon year upon year, age upon age. Without it, the Earth might lurch and wander upon its axis over the ages, tipping into wild and violent swings of season and of climate that no slow-growing, complex, fragile life could ever easily survive. We may owe the very steadiness of our own sky, the dependable turning of summer into winter and back again, that every living thing here has been built around, to a single ancient accident, long ago, to the chance that gave so small a world so large a moon. Consider the great planet Jupiter, far out in the cold and the dark beyond us. Its enormous gravity has, across the long history of the solar system, helped to sweep and to steer many a wandering mountain of ice and stone, drawing some of them quietly away from the inner worlds where the Earth turns in its narrow warmth, a giant standing silent watch in the outer dark, set in some measure between us and a sky full of falling stones. Worlds without such a guardian might be struck far more often, and far harder, and far more cruelly. Their slow and patient climb toward complexity broken again and again, smashed back down to the very beginning, before it could ever once finish. And consider, even, the Earth's place within the wider galaxy itself. Not too near the crowded, violent, blazing heart of it, where exploding stars and fierce radiation might scour a young world bare of everything it had so slowly gathered, and not so far out toward the thin and barren rim that the very stuff of rocky planets grows too scarce to gather a world at all. A quiet, temperate neighborhood, in a quiet, temperate quarter of the great galactic wheel. A kind of habitable zone, you might say, not merely around a single warm star, but within a whole vast galaxy. Any one of these, taken alone, might be common enough across the countless worlds. But the rare Earth idea asks us to imagine them stacked, one upon another upon another upon another. The right ground and the right moon and the right guardian and the right place and 100 other quiet fortunes besides, all of them holding true together on the same single world across billions of long and uninterrupted years. And there is one step, deep in the long story of life on Earth, that may be the very narrowest passage of them all. For most of our planet's vast history, for well over 1 billion years, life remained small and simple, single cells drifting and dividing in the ancient seas, going, for an immense and patient span of time, almost nowhere at all. And then, just once, so far as we can tell, 2 of those simple cells joined together and became something altogether new. A single larger, richer, more intricate kind of cell, with a sheltered heart and a wholly new depth of complexity folded up inside it. The small seed from which every plant and every animal and every thinking, dreaming creature would one slow day grow. Just once, in nearly 4 billion years of patient trying, it may have been the easiest thing in all the world. A small step taken 1,000 times over on 1,000 other worlds we will never see. Or it may have been a stroke of fortune so staggeringly, breathtakingly rare, that across 1 million other living planets, it simply never happened at all. And those worlds remain, to this very night, warm green oceans of the simplest life, full and thriving and utterly, eternally silent, that never once took that single quiet step toward minds. If that is so, then the silence has a quieter, and a sadder and a gentler shape than mere distance. It would mean the galaxy may indeed be full of life, full of warm, wet, living worlds beyond all counting. But to be alive is not the same as to be able to speak. And if the long road from a single cell to a true civilization runs through so very many narrow gates, each one easy to fail and terribly hard to pass, then perhaps only a handful of worlds in the whole great wheel of the galaxy, perhaps in the very end only one, has ever walked the entire length of it. Not because life itself is rare, but because we are, because the particular, improbable, hard-won thing that you are, a creature grown complex enough to lie here quietly in the dark and wonder about all of this, may be among the very rarest things the universe has ever yet managed, in all its long ages, to make. Hold that thought too, as gently as you held the first. It is not a lonely thought, though at first it may sound a little like one. It is, if anything, a reason for a kind of deep tenderness toward this small and improbable world, and toward the long, unlikely, unbroken chain of fortunes that led, across 4 billion patient years, to the slow and quiet rise and fall of your own breathing in the dark tonight. There is a way of gathering all of these thoughts together, the narrow gates, the rare steps, the long, improbable road, into a single, quiet idea. It is an idea proposed by an economist named Robin Hanson, who set it down in an essay in the year 1996, and gave it a name that has stayed fixed to it ever since. He called it the Great Filter. The thought runs like this. Picture the whole journey, from nothing at all to a civilization that fills the stars, as a single long road with many gates set along it. At the very beginning of the road stands a lifeless world, only rock and water, and the raw blind chemistry of a young planet, turning quietly in the light of its star. At the far end of the road stands a civilization so old and so capable that it is spread out across its entire galaxy, grown impossible to overlook, impossible to silence, impossible to miss. And between those 2 distant points lie all the steps we have been speaking of through the long night, the first faint stirring of life out of non-life, the long, slow climb from simple cells to complex ones, the slow rise of larger creatures, and then of clever ones, and then of clever ones who learn to build, and to speak across the void, and at the last to leave their own world behind them, step after patient step, and each one a gate that must somehow be passed. Now here is the quiet, inescapable logic of it. the thing that gives the idea its strange and gentle weight. We look out at the galaxy, and we find it silent. No one, so far as we can hear, has yet reached that far end of the road and filled the sky with themselves. And yet the road plainly begins. It begins at least once, for here we are, part way along it, looking back the way we have come. So somewhere between the bare beginning and the star-filling end, there must lie at least one gate that is terribly, almost impossibly hard to pass. One single step on the whole long road where very nearly everything that sets out simply stops, and goes no further, and falls away into the dark and the silence. That brutally narrow gate, wherever along the road it happens to stand, is the great filter, the one hard place that strains out almost all the life there is, and lets through, perhaps, almost none at all. It is a simple idea, when you hold it. Almost too simple. And yet from it hangs the whole weight of our future. For the single thing the idea cannot tell us, on its own, is the one thing we most long to know. It tells us only that a great filter exists, somewhere along the road. It does not tell us where. And so the whole question, the whole quiet ache of it, narrows down to this. Where on the road does that gate stand? Is it behind us? Or is it still somewhere ahead of us, waiting, in the dark we have not yet walked into? Let us take the kinder possibility first, and rest in it for a good long while, here in the warm dark, before we trouble ourselves with any other. Perhaps the filter lies behind us. Perhaps the very hardest step on the entire road is one that we have, against all the odds, already taken. And the silence we hear all around us is simply the sound of how very few ever manage to take it too. There are good candidates for such a gate scattered along the early part of the road. Consider the very first step of all, the beginning of life itself, the moment when ordinary, lifeless matter on a young and barren world first arranged itself into something that could feed and grow, and make faithful copies of itself. We call that beginning by a quiet name, abiogenesis, life arising out of non-life. And the plain and humbling truth is that we do not know how it happened, nor how hard it was, nor whether it is the kind of thing that lights up readily on any warm and watery world, or the kind of thing that happens, by some staggering and unrepeatable fortune, only once in a galaxy, or once in the whole of a universe. It may be the most natural thing in all the world, a small fire that catches wherever the conditions are right. Or it may be the very narrowest gate there is, a needle threaded once and never again. We simply cannot yet say. And if that first kindling of life is itself the great filter, if living worlds are almost unimaginably rare, and most planets that could in principle bear life never quite manage to begin at all, then the silence is no mystery whatsoever. The galaxy is quiet because it is very nearly empty, and we are the rarest of all accidents, the one place where the match, against every odd, somehow caught, and held, and went on burning. Or perhaps the gate lies a little further along the road, at that single strange step we spoke of a while ago, when simple cells first became complex ones. Remember how very long the world waited for it. For more than 1 billion years, life on Earth went almost nowhere at all, content to remain small and simple and patient in the ancient seas, dividing and drifting and dividing again, age upon age upon age. And then, just once, the great leap was somehow made. If that leap is the hard gate, if simple life is common enough across the galaxy, but almost never finds its way across into true complexity, then again, the silence makes a quiet and complete and gentle sense. The universe may be wet with life, warm living worlds beyond all counting, and yet every one of them holding only the simplest of living things, none of them ever crossing over into the long story that leads, in the end, to minds and ships and signals sent out hopefully into the dark. Either way, if the filter is behind us, then the silence carries a strange and a consoling music. It means the worst is already over. It means the single most dangerous stretch of the entire road, the place where very nearly everything fails and falters and falls away, is a place that we have already, somehow, against all reckoning, come safely through. It would mean that you belong to a thread of life that threaded the narrowest needle in all of creation, and lived, and went on living, all the way down to your own quiet breath in the dark tonight. That the long, improbable climb that ended this very night in your own slow breathing was itself the hard part, and that the road ahead, by comparison, runs open and clear and gentle and long. To believe the filter lies behind us is to believe that we are precious and lucky and very nearly alone, but that our future, having once survived the gate, is now ours to keep and to make and to carry forward into all that vast and empty and waiting sky. It is the gentlest reading of the silence, and perhaps the truest, and there is no harm at all in resting in it for as long as you like. So rest in it now for a long, soft moment, here in the warm and quiet dark. Before we turn, just once, as honesty so gently asks us to turn and look without any fear at all at the other possibility. The harder one. The one in which the gate is not behind us, and never was, but is waiting, still, somewhere up ahead. If the great filter is not behind us, then it lies somewhere ahead. And to look at that possibility is not to be frightened. There is no room for fright in this quiet place, and no need for any. But only to look, honestly and gently, the way one can look at a hard truth in the deep calm of the night, when it is far away, and weightless, and can do no harm at all. The thought is this. Suppose the early steps of the road are not so very hard after all. Suppose life begins readily on warm worlds and finds its way to complexity often enough, and that clever, building, broadcasting creatures arise here and there across the galaxy more or less as the hopeful numbers first suggested they might. If that were so, then the galaxy ought to be full of young civilizations, rising and waking just as ours has risen and woken. And yet still, we hear nothing at all. If the gate is not at the beginning of the road, and the road is in fact well traveled, then the silence can mean only one thing, that something stops these civilizations later, further along the way, that there is a gate near the end of the road, and not the beginning, a gate that waits, quietly and patiently, for worlds at roughly the stage that we ourselves have only just now reached, and lets almost none of them through to the far side of it. Return, once more, to the last and quietest link in Frank Drake's long chain of questions. The longevity of a speaking world. How long does a civilization last, once it has finally learned to send its voice out into the dark? We have been a broadcasting world for less than a single human lifetime. It was only in the middle of the last century, in the year 1945, that we first laid our hands upon a power great enough to reshape, or to unmake, the very conditions of our own world, and almost in the very same breath of history, within those same few short years, we began, for the first time, to send our radio voice out past the edge of the sky, and into the wide space between the stars. The two powers arrived together, hand in hand, almost as twins, as perhaps they always must for any world that ever climbs this far along the road, the power to be heard among the stars, and the power in some measure to undo oneself. The ability to speak, and the ability to fall silent, born into the world in the very same brief and fateful moment. And so a quiet possibility opens, gently, in the dark before us. Perhaps this is simply the shape of the road for everyone who ever walks it, on every world there is. Perhaps any world anywhere that grows clever enough to broadcast across the void, also grows, at very nearly the same instant, powerful enough that its own future becomes uncertain. That the long, slow wisdom needed to carry such power safely across the centuries, is the very last and the very hardest thing for any young civilization to learn, and the slowest to arrive. If that is so, then the window in which a world both can speak and still survives to go on speaking might be terribly, achingly narrow. A few centuries, perhaps. A single flicker, against the vast and patient dark. Long enough only to send a thin handful of signals out into the night. And then to grow quiet once more, not in some great catastrophe witnessed and grieved across the light years, and not in malice, but simply because the gap between gaining such power and learning to live gently and wisely alongside it is the single steepest gate on the entire road, and most who reach it do not, in the end, quite manage to pass. This is the harder reading of the silence, and it is worth sitting with for a moment, calmly and without flinching, before we let it go. It says the stars are quiet, not because the road to minds is so very long, and not because we are the rarest of all accidents, but because the worlds that walk this road tend, so often, to fall still soon after they first begin to speak, that the galaxy is dotted, here and there, not so much with thriving and singing civilizations, as with the long quiet afterward of them. Worlds that spoke briefly, once ages and ages ago, and are speaking no longer. Worlds whose brief bright flames flared up, and were answered by no one in time, and went out again, one by one, somewhere, just past the gate. And it carries, of course, a sober and a serious implication for us, we who are lying here at the very threshold of that same narrow window, having held such power in our own young hands, for only the briefest sliver of all the long time there is. But notice even here, even in the very hardest version of the thought, that there is no certainty in it at all, and so there is no cause whatsoever for fear tonight, none. It is one possibility among several, no more proven, and no more likely, than the gentle ones we held before it, and weighed and set down. We do not know that the gate lies ahead, we do not know that it lies behind. We know only that the silence is consistent with both of them, equally, and patiently, and entirely, and that the not knowing is itself the whole of the great mystery. And there is something deeply steadying to be found here, even in the hard version, if you hold it in the right way, and turn it slowly to the light. For if the difficult passage really does lie just ahead of young worlds like ours, then the thing that carries a civilization safely through it is not power, and not cleverness, and not speed, and not noise, and not haste, and not force. It is patience, it is wisdom. It is the slow, quiet art of living gently with what one already has, and not forever grasping after more than one can carry. The very qualities, perhaps, and there is a soft and a fitting irony in this, the very qualities of a calm voice in the dark, taking its time, in no hurry at all, asking nothing of the long night, but to lie down, and rest in it, and be still. So we need not be troubled by the gate ahead, not here, and not now, and not tonight, and perhaps not ever. The hard possibility is only that, a possibility turned over slowly and calmly in the mind, looked at steadily and without flinching, and then set gently down again, like a smooth stone returned to the bed of a quiet river. Whether the filter lies before us or behind us, this night is wholly unchanged by it, and your breathing is unchanged, and the long, soft unwinding of the dark goes on exactly as it always has, and always will, and always must. We have looked as honesty asked us to look, at the harder of the answers. We have held it, and weighed it in the hand, and found it no heavier in the end than any of the others. And now, just as gently and just as easily, we may let it go, and turn at last toward the strangest possibilities of all, the ones in which the silence is not absence and not death, but something far more curious and far more quiet, and perhaps far closer to home than ever we supposed. For all that we have said so far has rested upon a single quiet assumption, that if they were truly there, we would know it. That a galaxy full of voices would be a galaxy we could plainly hear. But what if that assumption is simply wrong? What if the silence is not emptiness at all, and not death, but only the particular narrow shape of what we are able, with our small and early instruments, to notice? What if they are there, and merely not where we have happened to look, or not speaking in any way that we can yet hear, or not for reasons entirely their own, speaking to us just now? Begin with the gentlest version of this idea, which is also the most humbling one. We imagine ourselves to be listening to the whole of the galaxy. In truth, we are listening through the narrowest of keyholes. Think once more of our own voice, the radio glow of all our cities, our broadcasts, are chattering machines leaking outward into space for the last 100 years. We picture it flooding the galaxy, bright and unmistakable, a beacon for anyone to find. But that glow is astonishingly faint, and it thins with distance with a merciless and unforgiving speed, until, only a few light years out, it has already sunk beneath the natural hiss and murmur of the stars themselves, and is altogether lost. The plain fact, and it is worth holding very gently here in the dark, for it quietly changes everything, is that with the instruments we now possess, we could not detect a civilization exactly like our own around even the very nearest stars. Our own busy broadcasting world, seen from a neighboring sun, would look radio quiet. It would look, to a listener just like us, exactly as silent as the whole sky looks to us tonight. So when we say that we have heard nothing, we must say it humbly, and softly, and with great care. We have not searched the galaxy. We have brushed only the very nearest shore of it, with ears barely able to hear, for the briefest of moments. A whole sky full of ordinary, talkative, living worlds might lie just beyond the faint reach of our listening, and we would never know it at all, not because they are hiding from us, but only because we cannot yet hear so far into the dark. But there are stranger versions of the thought still, and they ask a harder and a more curious question. Not can they hear us, but might they choose, knowingly, to stay silent? Imagine a galaxy in which we are not alone, and not even rare, but only young. Imagine that the older civilizations, those that crossed their own narrow gates ages and ages ago, and have grown wise and patient and quiet beyond all our understanding, know perfectly well that we are here, this small new world only just learning to speak its first words. And imagine that they have agreed, in whatever way such beings might agree on anything at all, to simply leave us be, to watch perhaps from a gentle and respectful distance, but never to touch, and never to interfere, to let a young world grow up entirely undisturbed, finding its own slow way in its own slow time, exactly as one might step softly past a sleeping child in a darkened room rather than risk waking it. This quiet, gentle idea has a name. It is called the zoo hypothesis, set down by an astronomer named John Ball in the year 1973, and it suggests that the silence is not an absence at all, but a kind of deliberate, chosen, careful quiet. A held breath. A courtesy, extended unseen across the light years. The stillness of a watcher who simply does not wish to intrude upon a thing so new, and so fragile, and so very newly woken. And there is a deeper, dreamier turn of that same thought, offered by the novelist and engineer Stephen Baxter near the very start of this century, in the year 2001. He called it the planetarium hypothesis, and it asks, very softly, a question that the mind can only hold for a moment or two, before it slips gently away again, like water through the fingers. What if the silence is so perfect, so utterly and so seamlessly complete, precisely because it has been made that way? Because the quiet sky we see arching above us is not the true and crowded sky at all, but a kind of gentle illusion, arranged with great care all around us, a still and empty-seeming dome built only to let a young world go on believing for a little while longer that it is alone. It is an idea far more like a dream than a theory, impossible ever to prove and impossible ever to quite dismiss. And it is best held the very way one holds a dream, right on the soft and sinking edge of sleep. Lightly, and without gripping at it, letting it open like a slow flower for a moment, and then letting it drift quietly away again into the dark. You need not believe any of these. They are not really meant to be believed exactly, so much as to be turned over gently, like smooth cool stones in the hand, and considered, and then set down again. What they all share is a single quiet correction to all of our earlier certainty. They remind us that absence of evidence is not, by itself, evidence of absence, that a silence can have a great many causes, and that emptiness is only one of them, and perhaps not even the most likely one. The voices may be far too faint for us to hear across so great a dark. They may be speaking in some way we have not yet so much as thought to listen for, not in radio at all, but in some channel that our young and stumbling science has not yet even dreamed of. They may be choosing, out of patience or out of kindness, or out of a sheer and vast cosmic indifference, not to speak just yet to a world so very newly woken. The galaxy that sounds so utterly empty to us tonight may in truth be full to the brim, and merely discreet, going quietly about its vast and ancient business, all around us, in a language we have simply not yet learned how to hear. And there is a strange comfort in this too, perhaps the warmest comfort of them all, and a fine one to carry down towards sleep, for it asks us to hold our loneliness loosely and lightly, like everything else we have held tonight. It says, very gently, do not be so sure of the silence. Do not mistake the small reach of your own ears for the true and final shape of the whole sky. We are a young world, only 100 years awake, listening through the very narrowest of keyholes into a darkness almost wholly beyond our imagining. And the most honest thing that we can ever say about the great quiet is not that no one is there at all, but only that, so far, in the very little that we have so far managed to hear, we have not yet heard them, which is a wholly different thing, and a far gentler one, to hold in the heart as the night grows deep, and the eyes grow heavy, and the long dark draws you softly down. There is one more answer to the silence, and it is the darkest of them all, though we will hold it, just as we have held every other answer through the night, gently, and at arm's length, and let it do us no harm at all. It did not come from an observatory, this one, or from a long chain of careful equations. It came from a story. A novelist named Liu set it down in a work of fiction, published in its first language in the year 2008, and carried over into English some years afterward, in the second book of a great trilogy about the long, strange future of the Earth and its place among the stars. That book gave the idea its name, and the name has lodged itself in the imagination ever since. It is called The Dark Forest. Imagine, the story gently asks, that the whole universe is like a vast forest at night, and imagine that every civilization within it is a hunter, moving quietly and warily among the trees. In such a forest, a hunter who hears a single twig snap somewhere off in the dark cannot ever truly know whether the thing that moved it is friend or threat, gentle or dangerous, young and harmless, or terribly, unimaginably old. The distances are far too great, and the time far too long, to ever really ask, and wait, and slowly come to trust. And so, the story imagines, the safest thing that any hunter can possibly do, on hearing another somewhere out in the dark, is to stay perfectly still, and perfectly silent, and never, ever call out. To reveal oneself, to send one's own voice ringing out openly through the trees, would be to stake everything one has on the untested kindness of a stranger one can never hope to know, or to reach, or to understand. And so, in this imagined forest, everyone listens, and no one ever speaks. Not out of malice, and not out of hatred, and not out of fear of any particular thing, only out of a deep, and patient, and perfectly universal caution. The silence, in this telling of it, is not emptiness, and not death, and not even distance. It is discretion. It is a whole sky full of quiet hunters, each one keeping perfectly still, each one listening with all its heart, each one afraid only to be the first to make a sound in the dark. It is, let us be honest with ourselves here in the quiet, only a story, a single imagined answer, with no proof at all behind it, no more certain or more proven than the gentle answers we held before it. It rests upon grim and heavy assumptions about the very nature of strangers that may very well not be true at all, and many who think most carefully and most patiently about these things find it far more frightening than it is ever likely to be true. We need not believe for a single moment that the night is full of silent and watchful hunters, but the idea has a certain cold and undeniable elegance to it, a logic that clicks quietly shut like a latch, and it reaches out and joins hands with something real, with the simple fact that we ourselves, only 100 years into our own speaking, have already quietly begun to wonder whether it is truly wiser to call out boldly into the dark, or to listen, and to keep our own small counsel, and to wait, and to watch. The question that the story raises is one that we have genuinely, and only very recently, and rather uneasily, begun to ask of ourselves. And it touches, too, upon one of the very strangest threads in the whole long puzzle, the quiet question of the probes. For some have wondered why, if the galaxy really does hold older civilizations, we do not at the very least see their machines. It would not take living travelers to cross the great cold gulfs between the stars. A civilization need only build a single craft clever enough to make copies of itself out of the raw material it finds waiting along the way, to arrive at some new star, and quietly gather the rock and the ice it finds there, and build 2 more of itself, and then send those 2 onward into the dark to build 2 more again, and those in their turn to build still more, and more and more. Such self-replicating machines were imagined long ago, growing out of the careful work of a brilliant mathematician named John von Neumann, on machines that could reproduce themselves, and they carry his name still. A single seed of that kind, patient and unhurried and asking nothing of anyone, could in time spread itself across an entire galaxy, not in the blink of a signal, but over the long, slow turning ages, star by star by star. And so, some have argued, the galaxy ought by now to be quietly full of such gentle wanderers, drifting endlessly and patiently from one sun to the next. And yet we have found no sign of them either, no trace, no footprint, no drifting machine, nothing at all. We have, though, begun at last to look for them. In recent years, on those very rare occasions when a true visitor from beyond our own solar system has come drifting silently through it, a genuine wanderer from another star, passing briefly within our reach before falling away again forever into the dark, we have turned our finest instruments toward it, and asked, very quietly and very hopefully, whether it might perhaps be something more than a cold and tumbling stone. Only this past year, in the last cold December of 2025, just such a traveler swung in close around the sun, and the great listening machine studied it closely as it passed, sifting it patiently for any hum, any signal, any faintest whisper of a maker's hand. A few faint candidate signals did for a moment surface in the data, and each of them was examined with the greatest of care, one, by patient hands. And each of them, one by one, proved in the end to be only the noise of our own restless and chattering world, leaking quietly into the search. From the visitor itself, there came nothing at all. No beacon, no engine, no sign of any hand that ever made it, or sent it, or steered it. Only rock and ice, and the same long, indifferent silence it had carried with it across the cold dark between the stars. So even the machines are quiet. Even the patient, self-copying wanderers that ought by every reckoning to be everywhere by now, drifting through every quarter of the sky, are nowhere that we have yet been able to find a single one of them. Whether because they were never built at all, or because they pass unseen and unnoticed through the dark, or because, as the dark forest would softly whisper to us, everyone everywhere has chosen long ago to build nothing, and send nothing, and stay perfectly, watchfully still, we cannot say. We can say only this, that here too, in the one place where we had quietly hoped we might at last find a single footprint in the dust of the dark, we have found instead the very same gentle, immense and patient nothing that has met us, faithfully and unfailingly, everywhere else we have ever once thought to look. Let the dark forest go now, the way you would let go of a strange and passing thought right at the soft and sinking edge of sleep. It is the grimmest of all the answers we have held tonight, and very far from the most likely of them, and it asks us to believe hard and heavy things about the dark that the dark itself has never once actually shown us. Hold it lightly, just for a moment longer, and then simply release it, and let it drift quietly away into the night. There is one last place to look before the night turns gently toward its rest, And it is not out into the silence at all, but inward and homeward at ourselves. For all this long night we have been asking about them, the distant others, the voices that are not there. But there is a quieter way to come at the silence, and it is to turn the whole question gently around, and to ask it instead of ourselves. What does our own small story tell us about what a civilization can become, and how far and how fast? Because if we can imagine clearly what they might one day grow into, then we will know far better what to look for in the dark, and understand perhaps a little more about why it is that we have not yet found it. Some 60 years ago, an astronomer named Nikolai Kardashev offered a simple and rather beautiful way to measure the greatness of a civilization, not by its wisdom, or its art, or its kindness, none of which can ever be seen across the gulf of the stars, but by the one thing that can, the sheer scale of the energy it has learned to command. He sketched it out in the year 1964 as a ladder of 3 great rungs. A civilization of the first kind, he said, would master all the energy available upon its own home world. Every ray of sunlight that falls upon it, every wind and tide and fire and storm, gathered and turned to its purpose. A civilization of the second kind would reach further still, and learn somehow to gather the entire output of its star, not merely the thin sliver of light that happens to strike its single planet, but the whole vast flood of it, pouring out endlessly in every direction at once, almost all of which, in any ordinary solar system, simply streams away forever into the empty dark, unused and ungathered and unseen. And a civilization of the third kind would command the energy of an entire galaxy, 100 billion stars, somehow harnessed together into a single will, a feat so far beyond us that the mind can barely begin to frame even the shape of the thought. And where, upon that great ladder, do we ourselves stand tonight? Not even, yet, upon the first rung of it. We draw our power still from the buried remains of ancient forests, pressed into the stone over unimaginable ages, and from a few thin and hard-won streams of sun and wind and atom, and we command only the smallest fraction of even our own world's modest share of energy. By a careful reckoning that the astronomer Carl Sagan once offered, we sit at something like 7/10 of the way toward that very first rung. A young civilization, barely begun, only just learning to stand upright, with the whole long climb still rising away ahead of us into the dark and the unknown. We are, in the great scale of these things, very new indeed, very small, only just awake, and rubbing the sleep from our eyes. But here is exactly why that ladder matters to the silence, and why it is worth holding in the mind. For if a civilization ever did climb all the way to the second rung, if it truly learned to capture the full light of its star, then it would become, almost despite itself, and whether it wished to or not, visible across enormous distances. Long ago, a physicist named Freeman Dyson pointed this very thing out, in a short and quiet paper in the year 1960. To gather all the light of a star, he reasoned, a civilization would have to surround it somehow. To build, slowly, over ages and ages, a vast swarm of structures encircling their own sun, drinking in the whole of its outpouring energy as it streamed away. And such a colossal thing could not be perfectly hidden, however much its makers might one day wish it. The captured energy would have to escape again in the end. For energy always, in the end, escapes, spent, and dimmed, and softened, glowing quietly out into the dark as a faint, low warmth of waste heat. A telltale, gentle, unmistakable warmth, radiating steadily outward into the night, unlike the clean white light of any natural star. So we have looked for exactly that. We have swept the sky patiently year upon year, for stars that glow strangely and softly warm, for suns half swallowed in shadow, for any sign at all of so titanic and so patient a work of engineering anywhere among the 100 billion stars of our galaxy. And we have found none, no shrouded suns, no engines the size of whole solar systems. Nothing but ordinary stars, burning in the ordinary way, exactly and only as nature first kindled and left them. And this returns us, at the very last, to the oldest and the simplest form of the whole puzzle, the very form that first troubled Fermi himself over his lunch all those long years ago in the high desert light. For the galaxy is old, almost beyond any reckoning. More than 13 billion years it has been turning, slowly, in the dark. Time enough over for 100 civilizations to rise and spread, and slowly fade, one after another. And it is, by the measure of a truly determined traveler, not really so very wide after all. An astronomer named Michael Hart worked the whole thing through with great care in the year 1975, and the conclusion is sobering in its sheer, quiet plainness. Even crawling from star to nearby star at speeds that we ourselves could very nearly imagine one day building, never once breaking the ancient law of light, a single patient civilization bent quietly on spreading could cross the entire galaxy, could settle it, star by star from one far end clear to the other, in just a few million years. And a few million years, set against the more than 13 billion that the galaxy has already turned, is the very merest afternoon. A single held breath. It means that if even one civilization had arisen, anywhere at all, in all that vast and patient reach of time, with the simple will to spread, and the patience to do it slowly, then it would have had time, many times over, to reach every last quiet corner of the galaxy long, long ago. To have reached by now, even here, even this small and ordinary world, turning gently beneath you in the dark. And that is the whole of the paradox, returned to us at the very end of the night, and sharpened now to a single fine and quiet point. They should already be here. Not merely their faint signals, struggling across the long light years toward us, but they themselves, or their patient self-copying machines, or at the very least, the great warm shadow of their works thrown across the bright faces of the stars. The galaxy is old enough, and small enough, that a single ambitious civilization could have quietly filled it 10,000 times over before our own sun was so much as born. And yet we look, and we listen, and we find the sky entirely natural and quiet, and to every appearance wholly perfectly untouched. No settled stars, no shrouded shadowed suns, no wandering machines drifting between the worlds, no ships, no beacons, no voices, only the long, smooth, patient silence, exactly as it was on the day that Fermi first asked his quiet question over lunch, and exactly as it is again tonight, above the very roof under which you are lying now, growing heavier and warmer and more still. We have looked outward, into the dark for the others, and we have found only stillness. We have looked hard at the road itself, and found it strewn from end to end with narrow and difficult gates. And we have looked at the very last, inward and homeward at ourselves, a civilization not yet even one full step up the ladder, a mere 100 years into its speaking, gazing out at a galaxy that by every honest reckoning we can make, should be full to overflowing, and is, so far as we can yet tell, empty. That is the shape of the thing, whole and entire. That is the great silence, laid out at last in all its quiet parts. And now, gently, and without any fear at all, it is time to ask what it might truly mean, and then, just as gently, to let it go, and to sleep. So what are we to make of it in the end? This silence that the whole of the night has so patiently laid out before us. We have gathered through the long dark, a handful of answers, and we have held each one of them gently in turn, and weighed it and set it down. Perhaps the others are simply too far away, and their brief lights and ours have never once overlapped across the vast cold gulfs of time. Perhaps the long road to minds runs through gates so impossibly narrow that we are among the very rarest things the universe has ever made. Perhaps a hard passage lies waiting ahead of every young world, and the sky is quiet only because so few who reach it ever survive to cross. Perhaps they are there after all, the whole sky full of them, only too faint for us to hear, or kind enough to keep their distance, or quiet, as a story once imagined, out of some ancient and universal caution. We do not know which of these is true. We may not know for a very long time yet, perhaps not for many ages. The honest and the humbling shape of the silence is that it fits them all, and rules out none of them, and leaves us standing here together beneath a vast sky that keeps its one great answer entirely to itself. But let me offer you one last way to hold it. Not the darkest, and not a fairy tale either, but a possibility every bit as real as any of the others we have weighed, and far, far kinder to carry down with you into sleep. It begins by noticing something that we have left quietly unspoken all night long. We have been asking where everybody is, all this while, as though the great party were already long over, and we had only just arrived to find the rooms empty, and the chairs pushed back, and the candles guttered out. But what if it is not late at all? What if, in truth, it is still terribly, wonderfully early? Consider the age of things once more, gently, one final time. The universe is some 13.5 billion years old. And to us, that surely sounds impossibly ancient, an unimaginable abyss of time. But the stars will go on being born for far, far longer than that. The great age of starlight is not ending. It is barely even beginning. Small, steady, patient stars will kindle and burn on for hundreds of billions, even trillions of years into the deep future, so that all the time that has passed since the very beginning of everything until this present night is less than the faintest, thinnest sliver of all the time that is still to come. If the whole long life of the cosmos were laid out as a single night, the sun would not yet have so much as set. We would be standing together in the last pale gold light of the very first evening of all, with the whole of the dark and the whole of the long-promised dawn still lying quietly ahead of us. And so some have wondered, quite seriously, whether the conditions for life and for minds are only now, in this early age, beginning at last to ripen. Whether the long, slow, patient work of building the very stuff that living worlds are made of, the iron and the carbon and all the rest, forged generation upon generation in the hot hearts of dying stars and scattered out upon the dark, has only lately reached the richness that life truly requires. And if that is so, then the great tide of living worlds, the long high noon of the cosmos, when the galaxies will brim and overflow with minds, may lie not behind us in the past at all, but far ahead, in the deep and waiting future, ages and ages and ages from now, when the universe has grown old and full and warm with company, and we, lying here quietly together tonight, would not be the last forgotten guests at a party that has already ended. We would be among the very first to arrive. So early that the great hall is still nearly empty. So early that the others have not yet woken, are not yet even born. And the silence all around us is not the silence of a graveyard at all, but the silence of a quiet house just before the dawn, when everyone within it is still soft asleep, and the one who has risen first stands alone and wondering at the window, watching the dark, waiting for the light, alone only because no one else has woken yet to keep the long vigil with them. That is the verdict that I will leave with you, here at the gentle end of the night, not as a certainty, for there are no certainties at all in any of this, but as the one reading most worth holding as you drift down toward sleep. The silence may not be a warning, and it may not be a grief. It may simply and quietly and beautifully be the hush of the early morning of the universe. And if that is so, then the loneliness we may have felt all night long takes on a wholly different shape in the dark. It is not the loneliness of having been left behind. It is the loneliness of being first, of being among the very earliest minds the whole vast cosmos has yet managed to open, a thin, brave scattering of watchers, woken in the dim grey hour before sunrise, each one quietly carrying the small flame of awareness through the long, still hours, until the rest of all creation slowly stirs and wakes, and at last joins them. And that casts the whole of it, even the harder answers we held earlier, into a gentler and a warmer light. For if we are early, then what we are, and whether we last, matters more than ever we knew. It would mean that this small blue world is not some latecomer hurrying breathless into a crowded and singing galaxy, but a beginning, perhaps one of the very first places anywhere where matter ever sat up and looked around itself and began to ask these very questions in the dark. It would mean the silence is not empty of meaning at all, but heavy and brimming and full of it. A whole galaxy still waiting, still unwritten, with the first faint pages only now being gently turned. Here, and on whatever other rare and early worlds have quietly woken alongside us in the night. And it would mean that to keep this one small light burning, to carry it carefully and patiently through whatever gates may yet lie ahead of us, is not a small thing at all. It may be one of the oldest, and the most precious, of all the tasks the cosmos has ever set. Simply to be awake, and to be gentle, and to last. You do not have to settle any of this tonight. No one ever has to. The beautiful and the difficult, and the deeply restful truth is that we are living inside the question, and not the answer. A young world, only 100 years into its listening, standing quietly at the window in the early dark, not yet able to say whether the great house is empty, or only still asleep. And there is a deep and an abiding peace to be found in that, if only you let yourself rest in it. You are not required to know. You are not required to solve the silence, or to fear it, or even, tonight, to break it. You are only asked this once, to lie here gently beneath it, and to let it be exactly and entirely what it is, vast, and patient, and unhurried, and brimming with a meaning we cannot yet read. So let the question go now, the way the night so gently lets go of the day. Let the others, wherever and whenever they may be, the ones long silent, the ones not yet woken, the ones we will never meet across the great gulfs of space and of time, let them rest too. The listening will still be there in the morning. The great machines will go on quietly turning toward the stars without you, patiently and faithfully, all through the night while you sleep. There is nothing at all that you need to keep watch for tonight. The silence has waited 13 billion years already, and it will wait a little longer still, and keep until you wake. And high above you, far beyond the roof and the dark, and the thin blue line of the air, the sky goes on exactly as it has all night. 100 billion suns in our own slow-turning wheel of stars, and nearly 2 trillion other wheels beyond it, turning and saying nothing at all. Not the silence of an empty universe, perhaps only the silence of a very early one. The soft hush of a vast house in the last quiet hour before the dawn, with one small light still awake within it, and growing softer now, and dimmer, and at the very last content to close its eyes, and trust the dark, and sleep. So rest now, there is nothing left to listen for tonight. Let the question grow quiet, let the stars turn on without you. Far above, the great silence holds the sky as it always has, not empty perhaps, but only early, only waiting, only asleep like you. You were among the first to wake and wonder. That is enough. That is more than enough. Let your breathing slow and deepen, and carry you gently down. Let the small light of your own awareness grow soft. The way a candle settles low in the last hour of the night. The universe will keep, the silence will keep. And you, one small and early watcher in a vast and patient dark, have done all that this night asks of you, simply by being here, and listening, and now, at last, letting go. Sleep well. And we will drift among the galaxies again, you and I, another night.